Okay, team, we're going to get started. How to write a purchase agreement. So for you newer agents, I want you to know that practicing this is really, really important, because if you don't practice it now, you're going to be doing it in front of a client. And that is not a great way to be practicing it, let me tell you. So when we write a purchase agreement, we know that there are a few things that are in place already, right? Based on what we're seeing here, you should already have a signed copy of 1, your agency agreement, 2, your buyer rep agreement, the Keller Williams forms, buyer disclosure waivers and notices, the wire fraud alert. That thing shows up multiple times just to make sure. You're also going to want to make sure you have that pre-approval letter, and maybe depending on the situation, you may have your buyers write a letter to the sellers. I call it a lovey letter. Okay, so those are the things you're going to want to have in the mix. The things that you're now going to need are, bottom right corner, number 1, residential purchase agreement. Number 2, earnest money receipt. 3, the seller's disclosures. 4, arbitration. 5, compensation disclosure to buyer. And number 6, personal property agreement, or slash, I like to call it a bill of sale. It typically is an agreement between the buyer and seller for things that are not affixed to the property. Like, hey, I'm selling my lawnmower along with this deal. We're not going to put that in the purchase agreement. It's essentially an agreement between the buyer and seller for the personal property. So let's dive in. I'm going to jump out of this screen. We're going to go to the MLS. I want to have to save things. Okay, we'll just say we're going to not save. All right. So one thing that you need to know is when you go to create a transaction, the button up top here allows you to do that, okay? I just titled mine how to write a purchase agreement. You're going to title yours probably the address of the property, comma, their last name. It's a really good idea starting out to get in the habit of labeling each transaction 2 ways, address, comma, last name, because you're going to have a few different ways to look up that transaction, and just make it uniform. Okay. So you don't want to write Connie's house, and then the next one is, an address. It's like if you have a transaction coordinator trying to find something in your business and all you've put is Connie's house, they're not going to have a clue what that is. Okay. So address, comma, last name. All right. So I've got the forms all ready to roll. What's really helpful is when you create a buyer or a listing transaction, there's this nifty transaction checklist. Okay, it's going to tell you everything that you need and then more. So you're going to have to go through this list and go, okay, these are all the possible forms I could need. But in the situation we're going to talk about today, we're going to buy a residential property. So obviously we're not going to need to worry about a CIC, right? This isn't a townhome. There's no association. There's no well. All right, okay, it's public septic and public water. So there are some pages, some forms on this page that you just have to ignore. So you pick and choose what you need. So I've done that already. And I've put together a list in my forms of what I need. Okay, so the checklist is still there. So I can always jump back and go, did I get everything I need? Oh yeah, perfect. I got everything I need. So now I'm going to get out of that. Just takes a second. All right, so I'm going to need my earnest money receipt, that purchase agreement, the arbitration agreement, compensation disclosure to buyer, and then possibly that personal property agreement. Okay, I like to put these in my transaction desk in the order that I like to present them. If you're like, oh, I really want my purchase agreement first, you can always move these around. Okay, so I typically will put this guy first. So, okay, now let's start filling these guys out. Let's go to our earnest money. Let me back it up one step because I want you to know earnest money has flown the coop. There it is. I want you to know what I've done previously is gone to the details, filled out all the information that I know, all of the information about the property as well as the legal information has been auto-populated because I put in the address. I've also added a few things. I've added the date that we're writing the offer so that it shows up on the forms once we're rolling. I've also added all the contacts already. Okay, so we've got Aaron is going to be our buyer, and Amanda is going to be the buyer's agent. Then there's me. I should be the seller. Oh, Amanda is the seller's agent. I just didn't copy her name correctly. So here's what you do. You just go back here. I'm going to edit Amanda. And Amanda actually works at Rochester Title. So I just grabbed somebody I knew. Okay, so we're going to make her the seller's agent. Okay, that should change things. All right, I've got Connie Edwards. So Aaron and Connie are in here and Keller Williams being our brokerage. Okay, that's going to help because it auto-populates the forms for you. Okay, so let's jump right in. Earnest money. This is just a receipt. It kind of stemmed from the days where we'd pass checks around to each other. And instead of having to submit a check every time you put an offer in, this said, I have the check, know that I have it, and it will be deposited as soon as we have an accepted offer. Okay. But obviously you just go through your earnest money receipt, fill in the information, time, 11:45 p.m. Okay, so you'll know when we get to the purchase agreement that our earnest money is $3,000. So we're kind of working on information that I know that you don't know yet. So just bear with me. Check number, I don't always know the check number. Sometimes it's going to be trust funds where we can send it electronically. 9 out of 10 times, that's what we're doing. So I just put trust funds related to the purchase agreement dated today. The property address has been auto-populated. And then at the end, we're going to fill this in when we go to sign. Okay, so we filled that form. Now we save and exit and we go to the next form. It's our purchase agreement. Okay, so this is the meat of what we're doing today. Okay. So let's fill out a purchase agreement together. And you guys, I'm going to say it again. This is something you should not be doing for the first time in front of a client. Okay. So I filled in the date. I filled in their names. So it's wonderful. It auto-populates. I like to go to the fonts and make sure the color that I use is something other than black, so it stands out nicely. Okay, so let's go through our purchase agreement. Date, buyers are here listed 3 and 4. Earnest money is in 5 and 6. As soon as you type in 3,000, it's going to auto-populate. Shall be delivered to the listing broker, or traditionally the listing broker holds the earnest money. Sometimes if I'm doing a for sale by owner, then I would say, nope, I'm going to hold the earnest money and we're going to put it on Keller Williams, and I fill that whole part in, but we don't need to do that now. We're going to go with a traditional sale and it's going to be a $325,000 purchase. So our earnest money is $3,000. Obviously, here's all the legal description that they have that auto-populated. The next thing we're going to talk about is the purchase price. Okay, so the seller is going to offer $325,000. It auto-populates. Then we have to tell our seller, how are we going to pay for this? Okay, so this particular buyer is going to put 20% down in cash, and they're going to finance 80% of it. Okay, so this doesn't apply. and this doesn't apply. Okay, so obviously whatever we put in here has to add up to 100%. Okay, so if you're doing an FHA, for instance, it might be 3.5 here. So then this one would be 96.5, right? So these two need to add up to 100. Okay, but for this transaction, we're putting 20% down, solid buyer right here, and they're going to finance 80%. Now let's talk about the close date. Here's what you do. You're sitting down and you grab your phone and you open up your calendar, and you and the buyers talk about when would be a good day to close. So we know that this transaction could close in 30 days. So I'm on September 28th today. Let's go to October 28th and see what we have. Well, October 28th is a Friday. General rule of thumb, if you can avoid closing on a Monday or a Friday, it gives you a little bit of wiggle room, okay? So I don't want to close on a Friday because if anything goes sideways, now we have Saturday, Sunday, and we can close Monday. That has a lot of implications, especially if there's a number of deals lined up. We call that lining up the dominoes, right? So I go a month out. If it's a Monday or a Friday, I try and alter it. So my options would then be to go October 27th or wait for that weekend and go November 1st. Because we don't want to close on a Monday, right? That'd be October 31st. So we're going to bump it to a Tuesday. So that's what we had decided that we were going to do, that we were going to go to that November 1st close date. Okay. So just a little tidbit of helping transactions go smoothly. Don't close on a Monday or Friday if you can manage. All right, we're gonna have to tell the seller what kind of a mortgage we're going to be getting. So the purchase agreement is subject to the mortgage financing, line 57. So it's a first mortgage. That doesn't mean the first they've ever had, but if you've got multiple mortgages in your name, this one jumps to number one as far as priority. So first mortgage, we have a conventional loan. So then we don't need to fill out any of the rest of it. Okay. So this talks about how long it's going to take us to pay off this mortgage. So we're going to go 30-year amortization, not more than. Sometimes if people's numbers are tight and they know they can't go over a 5.5% or a 6%, you may want to put that rate specifically in there. Otherwise, if they're like, hey, like whatever the interest rates are in the next 30 days will be fine, then I just put market rate in there. Okay. So then talking about the contingencies. So if the buyer cannot secure the financing, we want the earnest money refunded to the buyer. Okay. So what if we get 3 weeks in and the buyer loses their job? Well, they're pre-approved based on having that job. So now they can no longer buy this house. So we're writing that in. This is a contingency that protects the buyer. Okay, so if they cannot secure the financing, earnest money gets refunded to the buyer. Okay, you have the option of saying forfeited to the seller, but you're writing the purchase agreement with your buyer's best interest in mind. That's what it would be. Now, you could also give the seller a little more assurance and say, okay, I'm going to provide this written statement, which we're not going to do on this one. That just means the lender is promising to send a written statement to the seller by a certain date, reassuring that seller that, yep, they are clear to close. There's nothing standing in their way. Okay. Oftentimes, if that's the case and the buyer, for whatever reason, doesn't close, the earnest money can be retained by the seller right here, or they can still say refunded to the buyer. So I'm going to unclick that one. But we're not going to do that in this purchase agreement. We're just going to keep it simple and say, if the financing falls through, then the buyer gets to have their earnest money back. Okay. Locking the interest rates, line 112. So anytime prior to closing or as required by the lender is typically what we would check off. Lender commitment work orders. So what is this? So we're going to be buying a house, the one that we're putting the offer in on, that's in really good shape. Okay. And it's a conventional loan. Let's pretend that the house we're buying was had a little bit of rough edges. Maybe some peeling paint. Maybe the cement work out in the front had some trip hazards, or there wasn't a railing on the stairs going down the back. FHA is going to call those out. VA is going to call those out. The appraiser will. So sometimes an appraiser will go to a house and they'll say, oh, all looks great except this one thing. I need you to put a stair rail on those stairs before I sign off on it so that the lender can give you the clear to close. That's what this is, a lender commitment work order. So when I'm walking through a house with a buyer, I'm looking at these things, especially if they're FHA or VA, saying, what are the things that an appraiser could possibly call out? And what do I think it would cost to fix those? So if there were, for instance, a few things, I might say, okay, I'm going to put that the seller agrees to pay up to $100 in repairs to make the appraiser happy. Okay. So on the house that we are going to put an offer in on, the house is in really good shape. So I'm going to say nothing. I am 90% sure the appraiser isn't going to call anything out. So I'm not going to, I'm going to let the seller know that I'm not expecting that he's going to have to make any repairs. Okay. So if you are in a situation where the appraiser does call something out, you guys get the repairs made, and then that appraiser has to go back out to the house. They don't do a full appraisal. They just have to go inspect that the work was done. Okay, so who pays that second fee? It's not a full appraisal fee. It's a fee they charge to have the guy go back out to the house. Okay, typically the buyer pays that fee. Okay, line 126 and on is the FHA stuff. We do not have an FHA member. We're conventional, so we can just skip all of that part. This part is FHA and VA. We can skip that whole part as well. We just leave it blank. The next part that we have to go down to is this line 156, seller's contribution to buyer's closing costs. Is the seller going to pay any of the buyer's closing costs? We're going to say yes. We're asking the seller to pay a few $1,000 in closing costs. You have two options here. You can say, okay, typically 3% is the max. There's situations where you can go over 3%, but just for argument, we're going to say 3% is what we could ask them to pay, but we don't need that many closing costs. We need $2,000. Oops. Helps when you have your cursor in the right spot. We're asking for $2,000 in closing costs. So you know that if we are offering $325, but we're asking the seller to pay some closing costs, really we're offering $323, okay? All right, let's scooch down to an inspection, the inspection section, line 167. Does the buyer want an inspection? We're gonna say yes. The buyer elects to have an inspection. The purchase agreement is contingent upon this inspection, which means the seller has said, yes, I accept your offer and the terms of your offer. One of the terms is that my buyer is going to have an inspection. So the contingency is that if they find anything during that inspection period that they are not comfortable with, they can get out of the deal and get their earnest money back. Okay. So that is the contingency. The seller does not agree to allow the buyer to perform intrusive testing. So basically, like you're saying, you can't be like knocking down a ceiling to see what's, if there's a dead mouse up there or something. So just know that typically we say seller does not agree to allow buyer. If there is a situation, I've had this before, where the paneling was starting to pull away, we weren't sure what was behind there, but the buyer really wanted to have permission to be able to pull that paneling all the way back and then to put it back. We have done that, where we would then, under this other inspection items, we would say, oops, excuse me, go back where we were. We would say seller does agree to allow buyer to perform intrusive testing. And then I would write down here what I wanted. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. And when you're in a market that is crazy. There are times that if a buyer really wants that house, they don't even have wiggle room to ask for an inspection. So that is another discussion for another class. So for right now, we're going to say that the seller does not agree to allow the buyer to perform intrusive testing. One of the most important things we have to do is decide how long is it going to take us to get that inspection done. I'm going to put 7, and notice it's calendar days, not business days. So if we get this deal buttoned up today, everybody signs, and the contract is delivered back to me, the clock starts ticking tomorrow. Okay, 7 calendar days. That's all we need to do for that part. Sale of buyer's property. Does my guy have to sell my house before I buy yours? No. So he does not. So the buyer represents that they have the financial ability to perform on this contract without the sale and closing of another property. All right. If my buyer has to close on a house first, then we would be up in this business up here, but we don't need to do that. We can come down and check box number 3. Real estate taxes and special assessments. We prorate. I don't know how I did that. That was pretty snazzy. We prorate from the day of closing. So seller pays taxes up till the day of closing. Buyer starts paying taxes from closing on. Okay. Typically we go seller shall pay the difference between the homestead and non-homestead. If you're buying a place that's been used as a rental, it probably has non-homestead taxes. So you're going to want to check on that. Deferred taxes and special assessments. Again, we typically say sellers shall take care of all deferred taxes and special assessments prior to closing. Okay, so it's really important for you to know based on the MLS sheet whether there are any special assessments pending. You can also jump on county records and check for yourself just to make sure there hasn't been anything that's been missed by the listing agent. And then just know walking in that sometimes there are special assessments, meaning the city has come along and said, all right, you didn't fix your cracked sidewalk, so we fixed it. So now you need to pay us $1,000. So that's going to show up on their county records, okay? So it's really important to know if those things are in play in a transaction. Scrolling down, you will find this section here in the seller's disclosures. As of the date of this purchase agreement, the seller represents that they have not received any notice regarding any new improvements, okay? So there's two places there that we have to really make sure that has been double checked. Any additional provisions, okay? So the purchase agreement is not subject to any cancellation. So we haven't written an offer on the house over there and, oh, we found a better house, we need to cancel that. And now in order to buy this one, there's nothing like that in play. Okay, then we go down to line 257. How are we going to transfer that title? Check warranty deed. There's a few situations where there's a contract for deed or a trustee's deed. 99% of the time it's a warranty deed. Okay, the rest of this just is part of the 1% that doesn't fall under warranty deed. Okay, so we're not going to deal with that today. When can my buyer have possession? 99% of the time, again, it's immediately after closing. Okay, you can't be moving your stuff in 3 days before closing because it's convenient for you. No, you can have possession immediately after closing. Typically, your agent will have the keys at the walkthrough you do just before closing, and then at the closing table, you get the keys after you've signed everything, okay? There's a few things up here that you can certainly read, talking about linked devices, saying, you know, if you've got an app for your garage door opener, obviously, when the seller leaves the house, they can't be like setting off your garage door opener in the middle of the night. They have to deactivate those links, okay? We're going to go down to line, and please read the rest of this. I'm not going to read through it all right now. This box on line 360 talks about buyer has received the disclosure statement. So that's saying, yes, we have read that disclosure statement. This talks about city water, city sewer. Yes, the place we're buying is city water, city sewer. The seller does not know of any subsurface treatment systems. Again, that is a lot of rural properties will have those septic systems. Private well, seller does not know of a well. Sometimes you'll sell a home in town, and typically this will happen if it's an older section of Rochester or the town that you're working with. there might have been an old well on that property. Okay, so that's where that you would disclose that here, and you'd have to verify that well has been sealed. And it's interesting, it's the Department of Health that holds those certificates. So you're going to have to make sure that the selling agent, the listing agent, can provide that for you. Okay. Purchase agreement is not subject to any addendums relating to well or septic. Home warranty. You have the option of saying, yes, I'd like a home warranty obtained by buyer or seller, paid for by buyer or seller. Okay. Typically on a nicer, well-kept home, a home warranty doesn't come into play. It may come into play for an older home that has some older mechanicals, for instance. But in this case, we're going to say no home warranty protection plan is going to come into play on this. We have to say who's representing whom. Amanda is going to represent the selling. She's the seller's agent. I'm the buyer's agent. Okay. If it's dual agency, then obviously that would have to be disclosed here as well. Dual agency, meaning the agent on the buy side and the listing side have the same brokerage. Okay. So we're going to scroll down. Does dual agency apply here? No, it does not apply because Amanda and I do not work for Keller Williams Premier Realty. Then you do not have to sign any of this. Okay. If it's not dual agency. If it is dual agency, then all of this has to get signed. All right, I'm going to let you read the rest of that. We get to the end. If there's anything else that comes up in this purchase agreement, you may say the buyer would like an answer by 10 o'clock tonight. That's where you would put this. Various clauses can get added down here. Okay, but for right now, we're trying to write a clean purchase agreement, meaning we're not asking for a lot. There's not a lot of loopholes, not a lot of, well, if this, then that. We want to write a clean offer because we know the market's kind of nutty. This is where we say, what else is attached to this purchase agreement? Okay, right now, there's no addendums to the purchase agreement right now that we have. So there's nothing here that we have to add. Notice right here, the lead-based paint. If your house is built before 1978, there's going to be lead in the paint. If you dig down deep enough in that very first layer, then there's an addendum that you need to add for that. But all of the rest of these are kind of for offers that have some little thing that's not conventional or requires some more explanation. Okay, so again, we wrote a clean offer. We don't need to add any of those. This is the box that gets checked if there's a counter offer. So if we send this in to the seller and they're like, yeah, I like your offer, but I'm not paying your closing costs, then they would write that on a counter offer, but this box would have to be checked, okay? The listing agent takes care of all of this. If everybody is in agreement, we all sign, okay? We don't fill in the final acceptance date. Final acceptance date is the date, and it says it right here on 510, is the date on which the fully executed purchase agreement is delivered. Okay, so not signed, but signed and delivered. Okay, so if I have a purchase agreement, oh, Connie is in the wrong spot here. Sorry, Connie. If I have a purchase agreement that, let's say Connie and Aaron don't do electronic signatures and I go to their place at 10 at night and we get things signed. And let's say these guys sign it the next morning. It can all be signed, but until this listing agent returns it to me via email, or I guess hand deliver would work too, until it's delivered, you do not have a fully executed purchase agreement where you can have a final acceptance date. Okay, so the final acceptance date is important because let's say we all get this signed today. Today's the final acceptance date. We know that the inspection period starts tomorrow and there are 7 days. So this final acceptance date is essentially, it tells all of the people involved, when does the clock start ticking for that inspection contingency period, okay? Super important. All right. So that, excuse me. Where's my little dealie here? There it is. That's the gist of the purchase agreement. We do have to sign a form here that says we've talked about arbitration, and we will talk about arbitration. It's coming up. And then this wire fraud alert shows up again. It shows up when you sign your buyer rep papers. It shows up here as well. Basically, they're saying make sure if you wire your funds, oftentimes buyers do, because you can come to closing with a cashier's check, or you can wire your funds. You can't come with cash and you can't come with a personal check, okay? So if you decide to wire your funds, you know, nowadays there's all kinds of crazy fraud stuff going on, all kinds of people who are, you know, trying to be sneaky and hack into your email and get your money or whatever. Make sure when you talk to the title company, you say, you know, that the email that they're requesting that you wire your funds to, the people on the other end of the line, if you get an email that looks kind of fishy, that's what this is about, okay? Don't be sending your 20% down payment to some, you know, Joe overseas who is trying to hack into your stuff, okay? All right, pretty self-explanatory. So that then is our purchase agreement. We're going to save and exit. Now remember, there are a few forms that needed to be filled out besides just the purchase agreement. The next one is this arbitration disclosure. Arbitration is a way to settle disputes in real estate without necessarily doing it through the court system. Now, this is one of those situations where you can't give legal advice, right? We all know that. And I always start by saying, I can't give legal advice. I want you to read through this and let me know if arbitration is an option for settling disputes, should one come up in this transaction. A really good, like 30,000 foot view is to just read what's in bold. So basically, in this case, arbitration says if your beef with the seller or buyer, whatever the issue is, will take less than $15,000 to resolve. This is saying you're going to go to small claims court. You can still get a lawyer, but you're going to go to small claims court. If the dispute and the remedy for that dispute takes more than $15,000 to resolve, then we're going to go to arbitration, okay? A few other things, your purchase agreement will still be valid whether or not you sign the arbitration agreement on line 1415 here. The next bold part is line 30 to 32. A request for arbitration must be filed within 24 months of the date of the closing of the property, or else the claim cannot be pursued. Okay, so you've got 2 years to file this arbitration dispute with the buyer or seller. Okay, there's also a form you can send to your buyers in this case that outline the different fees for arbitration, so you can do that as well. Important to note that here's where everybody signs. This form goes to the buyer and the seller. If one of the parties to this transaction decides they don't want arbitration to be the vehicle which they use to settle a dispute, they don't have to sign it. This really has no effect on the actual purchase agreement. It's just outlining, are we in agreement that this is how we're going to settle a dispute or not? Now, Aaron's going to sign, Connie's going to sign, I'm going to sign right here. Let's say the sellers are okay to sign it. Mr. Seller and Mrs. Seller are okay to sign it, but this agent doesn't want to sign it. They don't have to sign it. But again, in order for arbitration to be an option for settling a dispute, all parties to the transaction need to sign. Okay, so that is arbitration. Oop, did it again. Save and exit. The last thing we need to add, two things. This is a compensation disclosure. This does not typically get sent to along with our offer. This is separate, but we have to disclose to our buyers how much we are getting paid by the sell side, because let's say I'm under contract with the buyer for 3%. And let's say that when this house that they want to buy, they're only going to pay out 2.7%. Well, where does that 0.3 come from? The option for me is to ask the buyer to pay it, or to just waive it and say, it's fine, I'll get paid less. Okay, that's a business decision you make. But But when you sign that buyer rep contract, that's where you have that discussion. And if it's a situation where, like for me, this is just my decision, I like to say, look, 9 out of 10 times you're not going to pay me because the seller pays, right? That's where I get paid my commission. Here's a situation where I'm going to ask you to pay my commission. If there's a for sale by owner that you love, but they are not going to pay my commission, then I'm going to ask you to pay my commission. So we know walking in that if there's a for sale by owner that they love, they also have to factor in the 3% that they're going to pay me. Okay, so that's just the discussion. So when you look in the MLS, it always says how much that listing agent is paying out. So I have to disclose that. Okay, so how much am I getting from this seller? So I know that they're paying out 3%, but the buyer still owes some fees, right? So I like to have this in blue. There we go. So for me, I charge, the Market Center has their, hang on, I did this wrong. Hang on. I gotta back this up. $5.99. Boy, good grief, can I get this right or what? $5.99 is our broker admin fee, and $300 is the transaction fee. So that's where I put the fees that buyer is going to have to pay at the end. I would say those don't, that money doesn't go to me. That's just the fee that the brokerage charges. It helps pay our staff. It's just like the title company charges a fee for their service. Okay, so all of that gets discussed up front. Of course, then everybody signs. Okay, we save and exit out of that. And the very last thing that may or may not come into play, remember I said there's that personal property agreement. So let's say that the buyer and the seller agree that the table and chairs in the kitchen are going to stay, and that the lawnmower is going to stay. Okay, it's not part of the mortgage. The lender doesn't have to be involved with that. But basically, this is where you outline that. So seller shall, I don't know, however you want to word it. I can't think of how to word it with, being recorded. But this is where you outline what the seller shall leave for the buyer at no expense to the buyer, and then you outline it. And then you just make sure everybody signs that, okay, down here on the bottom. So the personal property agreement, remember, as our job as real estate agents is to bring clarity to the deal. So if there's any agreements that are made, put it in writing, get signatures from all parties, put the details in there, so there's no dispute at the end, okay? So that's what this is. This is just a way for us to document that agreement that the buyer and the seller have made, okay? Think of it like a bill of sale, okay? It's not part of the mortgage. It's not officially part of the purchase agreement. It's just saying, okay, we've talked about a few items. Now let's put it in writing so we know what we've agreed to. Okay, so save and exit. So we have filled out all our forms for that purchase agreement. All you need to do now is get signatures, send that off to the listing agent, communicate what the offer includes. It's always nice to say, hey, I'm sending an offer over, should be there soon. And then when you send it, just give a little summary in the email, build some rapport with that listing agent, and ask when do you think we should hear back, and cross your fingers and go from there. So if you have any questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to go through anything that is maybe an FHA loan or a VA, or it's an HOA, or it's a farm property. Those all are a little bit different. They involve a few other forms. So anyway, thanks you guys. Hope you have an awesome day. Take care. Bye.